Well, a good morning and good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to the 2017 Survey of College and University Presidents Enrollment Growth Predictions webinar. I'm Chris Edwards, the VP of Strategic Partnerships here at Helix, and I'm joined here by the editor of Inside Higher Ed, Scott Jaschik. We're really excited to have today's conversation. Both Scott and I spend a lot of time engaging with folks in higher ed and really trying to get a feel for what people are wrestling with and thinking about for each coming year. And that's what really sparked today's conversation, which is based on the Survey of College and University Presidents report that was released through Inside Higher Ed last month. There was a ton to dig through in that survey with the change in our presidential administration and questions about the public perceptions in higher ed, but we really saw a lot of the same themes surface for higher ed leaders, things like financial health and enrollment growth, to name a few. So we'll get into some of those themes with Scott today. Before I turn it over, a few housekeeping items. Our goal here is to leave a bunch of time at the end for questions with Scott. There's never a dull day in higher ed, and Scott and his team are on top of everything at Inside Higher Ed, so make sure to get your questions ready during today's presentation. There will be a couple ways to ask your question. First, here in the WebEx, you can use the chat, and we'll take questions there during the webinar. So type in your questions at any time using that function. And please be sure to identify the institution or affiliation you have as well when you do that. Second, you can engage with us on social media by using the hashtag HelixWebinar. So if you're on Twitter, feel free to @ your question to our team at Helix Education and use that hashtag HelixWebinar. And lastly, if we can do it neatly, we'll try to give folks the chance to ask their question directly of Scott through the audio on the webinar. So y'all are muted now. But if you would like to ask a question, do raise your hand or communicate with us through the chat with a quick preview of your topic and your institutional affiliation. And I'll call on you during the Q&A. We'll make sure Scott knows we're taking a live question, and I will unmute you so you can do that. One last thing. We'll be talking a lot about the challenges to growing enrollment that leaders are wrestling with today, and those challenges are precisely what prompted the development and release to our Helix Enrollment Growth Playbook. This playbook is the definitive how-to guide in the market for growing enrollments and optimizing performance throughout the life cycle. It's available free, and you can find it by visiting our website at helixeducation.com. If you go there, you'll get a great big pop-up window that says, hey, download it. So if you don't already have a copy, I really encourage you to visit the site and download one. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce the fantastic Scott Jaschik, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed. Scott is a leading voice on higher ed issues, quoted regularly in publications nationwide, including the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, Salon, and elsewhere, plus all the outstanding work they do at InsideHigherEd.com. If you don't get their daily newsletter, you absolutely should. Scott and his team at Inside Higher Ed, along with their friends at Gallup, do fantastic work each year with the President's Survey, and we are so excited to be a part of it. So Scott, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks for such a great introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I'm really excited to talk about some of the results from the survey, and many of these are results we haven't highlighted previously. We cover so much ground that I worry we don't get to go deep in some areas, and so this is an opportunity for us to do that, particularly on issues involving finances and enrollment pressures. So here very quickly is my contact information, and you are welcome to reach out at any time with questions. If you're one of those who needs to be signed up for our daily news update, send me an email and I'll take care of that. Very quickly, I want to explain the methodology of the study before spending most of our time here on results. The questions are prepared by Inside Higher Ed editors and then refined by Gallup, which has an amazing social science team, so they can tell us how to phrase questions in ways that we don't lead anyone in any particular direction. 706 presidents participated this year, which was an increase and is a great sample for this. All their answers are anonymous, but coded by their institution. And in some cases today, I'll be talking about differences between public and private, 2-year and 4-year, and that's how we're able to do that while also respecting their confidentiality. So if you are with us today and you are a president who answered, I do not know how you individually answered, and so I want you to feel confident in that. And also, I really want to thank Helix Education for being a sponsor. It greatly helps us to support the work we do and then to share it with great audiences like this one today. So I'm going to start with a slide about, we asked the presidents how confident they were that their institution would be stable financially over the next 10 years. And you can see that for a number of sectors, for all the sectors but one, an increase in that confidence level from 2016 to 2017. But this is a case where I think you don't want to just believe the glass is half full. I actually believe the glass is considerably empty. So first, let's start with private baccalaureate over on the far right. This is the one area, one sector where we saw confidence going down significantly in a year, so that less than half feel confident in their financial viability over a 10-year period. The other sectors all showed increases. So you might think, well, gee, this is good news. But my question is really, why shouldn't they all be much higher than that? Higher education, colleges and universities don't think of themselves as being like, you know, a hit movie that's going to go out of theaters and into Netflix after just a few months. They think of themselves as lasting generations, centuries. And to me, it is striking that across sectors, there isn't as high a level of confidence in their ability to be stable over the next 10 years. Now, public doctoral institutions have the greatest confidence, but I think a lot of that has to do with parts of the institutions that aren't necessarily about undergraduate education. So we'll come back to that, but for the starting point, it's worth noting an awful lot of college leaders are not feeling confident in their stability over a decade. Now, I'm going to be focusing today on enrollment, and enrollment really is such a crucial issue, but it's worth thinking about why it's such a crucial issue, because a generation or two ago, institutions just didn't spend so much time worrying about enrollment. Whether they were famous or not so famous, institutions tended to have feeder schools, patterns of enrollment. They didn't necessarily lose sleep over filling their classes. And many of them also didn't lose so much sleep over low retention rates. These days, though, just about everyone's budget is tuition dependent. It's true, you hear a lot in the media, present company excluded, about the Harvards and Stanfords and MITs that have massive endowments and aren't tuition dependent. But it's important to remember that just about everyone else is, public and private alike. Public, both because of the tuition dollars and because state support tends to be enrollment driven. Private, because that is the key source of revenue. People, even with an endowment of $100 million, $200 million, these are not sums that dictate budgets. These institutions survive, thrive, or not based on their enrollment and tuition. Debt worries about students and families can't be ignored anymore. This is also so important. The era of students just borrowing and figuring that it will work out are gone. There have been too many horror stories about students borrowing too much or borrowing and not having a plan to repay their debt. The student and the family are becoming better consumers. Finally, and we'll talk more about this later, many strategies colleges have been using, such as discounting, may not be sustainable. We all know that we make decisions either as institutions or personally that may not be the best for the long term if you have a short-term crisis. But things like discounting, which many colleges increased reliance on after 2008's economic downturn, are now reaching points that really can't be sustained. So that's why enrollment worries are so important. We're going to talk about a bunch of enrollment worries, but I want to focus on the biggest of enrollment worries, the existential worry: are you going to enroll enough students? This is particularly timely because yesterday was May 1st, the typical response date for many institutions at which accepted applicants need to indicate whether they are going to enroll. So people are literally counting their responses today. 47% of public college and university presidents are very concerned about meeting enrollment targets, and another 36 are somewhat concerned. That's kind of amazing when you consider how many public institutions are overcrowded, how many public institutions are in states that have growing populations, and how many public institutions have historically not had to worry about this. Yet more than 80% are worried. Then go to private colleges, and it's even worse, where 56% of private college and university presidents are very concerned, and another 29% are somewhat concerned. And then who is most worried? The presidents of private bachelor's institutions. This is your liberal arts college category, but also many other institutions, although they typically have a liberal arts component. 73% are very concerned. And here's where you need to sort of steel yourself against what you're going to be reading in many publications in the next few days, which is articles about how, Harvard let in 4.3% of applicants, and you're more likely to be struck by lightning than to get into Harvard. Well, you need to remember that is just not the norm. The reality, and NACAC, the admissions group, does a good study on this every year, the reality is that the vast majority of colleges admit the vast majority of students. So admissions and enrollment management for most places isn't about the gatekeeping role of deciding who to admit. It's about how do we make sure we fill our class, and then how do we fill our classes in ways that are consistent with our educational mission. You can't remember this enough, particularly when there's so much misdirection elsewhere from people who think that Stanford is the average university. But that's just one of the worries that colleges and universities have about enrollment. There are actually a whole bunch more. And so this, again, comes from the survey where we asked them how many were very concerned or concerned about certain issues. I'm going to run through them and talk about why they're important. Having enough institutional aid to admit the desired number of low-income students. Very high numbers, public and private. And what this points to is that many colleges are incredibly altruistic with giving away student aid. Many colleges have missions that very much focus on helping students move from working class to the middle class and beyond that, helping students see a better and brighter future. But the reality is it costs money to educate these students, to have aid for them, and the overwhelming majority of colleges don't think they have enough money. Enrolling students likely to be retained and to graduate on time. Again, more than 80%. This is again striking because many of you on the finance side know that it costs more to admit than retain, which makes retention a very important issue. And let's face it, students who are paying tuition and their parents don't want to pay tuition to drop out. And so there's a real issue of mismatch here. Enrolling enough students who don't need institutional aid. Now, this wasn't a big issue in publics, very big issue with privates. And then enrolling a diverse student body. This was a big concern to a majority of public and private alike. What these say to me overall is that there are very strong and admirable values in higher education among the leaders, and I know these are replicated among admissions officers, in terms of the social mission of higher education to educate a broad cross-section of Americans, to open doors for people. But those who balance budgets are aware that it's not so easy, that they need money to do so. Now, the impact of debt. This is such an important issue. Now, I, like probably many of you, borrowed money to pay for college. And I look back on it and I think that was the smartest investment I ever made. I repaid it, life went on, it was a good thing. But I borrowed at a level such that it didn't limit my career options, and I was able to go to a college I really wanted to go to. Today, there is constant fear about debt. I am struck that when I do sometimes talk radio shows, I get lots of questions that start with, I owe $80,000 in student loans, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of bizarre because most students don't owe anywhere near that. Typical student debt these days for the four-year degree is about $27,000, $28,000, which, while nobody likes to repay debt, isn't a crazy amount to borrow when you consider the financial advantage of having a bachelor's degree. Yet, people hear the horror stories, and many people, particularly those who are first-generation college students, are very debt-averse. It's different to borrow if you come from a family, say, that has taken out mortgages, taken out student loans, considers borrowing a way to get ahead. Not everyone has that experience. 81% of public presidents agree that attention to student debt has led many prospective students to think of college as less affordable than it really is. 88% of private college presidents agree. The reason this is such an important statistic is that many colleges look at their offerings and say, we offer so much aid, we're so generous. But if the student, if the prospective student doesn't know that unless he or she applies, and that's when they find out how much aid you have. And so if this fear is keeping people away, that is going to depress both enrollment numbers and application numbers. The debt issue is front and center to many people today. I've also met a lot of young people when I speak at college events who say they will only look at colleges where they don't have to borrow. Now, personally, I think that's very unwise because the right amount of debt, particularly if you avoid private debt, is like I said, a great investment. But this is the attitude that's out there right now, and I think it should be of great concern, and it shows why there's pressure on colleges not to increase tuition. International students. So American higher education has been, a place that international students have been wanting to come forever, and in the post-World War II era, American colleges and universities displaced Oxford and Cambridge as the prime locations for people to come to from around the world for graduate education. We attracted the best and the brightest, and they went on to do amazing things. In the last 10 years, though, we've seen a different pattern, and that is more and more American colleges coming to rely on international students to support undergraduate education, to be undergraduates, and, if we're going to be honest, to support institutions' financial base. The international students being recruited as undergraduates are almost all so-called full-pay students. And so these are the students who, who come not only very well prepared, but able to pay the tuition bill. Many colleges and universities have had a strategy in recent years of enrolling 5 to 10% of undergraduates from outside the United States. Sounded like a great strategy. Many had success in this area, and we're thrilled to be welcoming their international students. But let's face it, we have a new administration, and that administration has not exactly made many people around the world feel warmly about coming to the United States. One of the first things President Trump did was impose a travel ban to the United States from certain countries. That was thrown out in court. He proposed a new version. That was also thrown out in court. But I don't think for a minute that that's still not having a big impact. These travel bans and his desire to eventually have something in place have been read around the world as a symbol of not being welcome here. And even in countries that were not affected by the travel ban, and it's important to remember it was only a small number of colleges that were in the ban, and most of them weren't major suppliers of international students to the United States, it was a message. It was a message to everyone, particularly from Muslim nations. And we get a lot of great students from different nations. So that's has had a big impact. The most recent surveys that we have done and that others have done suggest that more than 40% of colleges are seeing declines in applications and expressions of interest from international students. This is very significant. And it's important to remember that the U.S. does not have a monopoly on these students. Where are they going? We're seeing a lot of indications that they're going to Canada. give you some data that we reported on recently. At the University of Toronto, applications from India are up 59%. Applications from Turkey are up 68%. Applications from Mexico are up 63%. And this one should really worry you. Applications from the United States are up 80%. The University of Toronto is a great university. And I use that as an example because right now, Britain, which normally would be one of our competitors for international talent, is going through some similar changes politically as we are in the United States. So international talent is not getting excited about Britain. But these applicants love Canada, they love Australia, they love New Zealand. They have options. Now, I don't think for a minute that the leading, most famous American universities are going to see a huge drop in international applications. People very much want to be at those institutions. But most colleges and universities that have come to depend on international talent for undergraduates aren't the most famous institutions. And there are options for them outside the United States. Likewise, if U.S. colleges need to start discounting to attract international students, some of the ways that international students have helped colleges balance their books may not work anymore. This is a rapidly changing area, and it's about both policy but also about perception. And I think a lot of colleges are really at risk of losing not only key parts of their student body, but a key part of their economic model. Now I want to talk more broadly about the Trump impact. And it's important to remember that many challenges facing colleges and universities predated the Trump administration and will outlast the Trump administration. I worry right now that many people in higher education are blaming everything on the president, and that's not quite correct. But he's now been in office such that we're seeing actual policies, actual budgets, and a different national environment. I'll start with the last one, the different national environment. It's important to remember that during the Obama administration, President Obama and Michelle Obama used their bully pulpits to constantly talk about the importance of seeking a higher education, to encourage more students to finish high school and go on to college. And they had an impact. I don't think it's a coincidence that high school graduation rates went up under the Obama administration. Now, we're not hearing that talk. And indeed, many Republicans in Congress are saying we don't necessarily need to see more people going to college. Well, depending on where you sit in higher education, that could have an impact on your mission and on the students who are enrolling. Generally, all of higher ed benefits when more people are looking at higher education. But then let's look at policies and budgets. So far, President Trump has proposed a budget for the next fiscal year and has just made a deal with Congress for the current fiscal year. The deal for the current fiscal year seems to have gone okay for colleges and even includes the restoration of year-round Pell. But if you look at the president's proposals going forward, there are a lot of challenges for higher education. He is proposing to cut or severely reduce spending on SEOG, work study, TRIO, AmeriCorps, the NIH, the NEH, all sorts of programs. And if you look at the student aid programs that he's touching, SEOG, work study, TRIO, these are programs that serve low-income students who may or may not be able to afford a higher education. Now, many of these programs are actually quite popular with both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, but the congressional leadership seems very intent on cutting taxes, spending a lot more in the military, and spending a lot more on border security. That is going to be hard to do while preserving these key education programs. So that's another challenge. And then what's really interesting to me is even as we have all of these concerns about the current model of higher education, we're also having a lot of radically new ideas. The photo on the left shows Governor Andrew Cuomo of my home state, New York State, with Senator Bernie Sanders, and they are smiling as Governor Cuomo proposed a free public higher education plan. And it was very surprising when he did this in January, because I and many others thought that when Hillary Clinton lost the election that this idea was going away. But Cuomo brought it back, and in the bigger shock, he got it through the New York State legislature, such that very soon families in New York State with income up to $125,000, which gets you well into the middle class, if not beyond, will be able to attend SUNY or CUNY campuses, and there are many of both and many fine institutions in those systems, free of charge. Not surprisingly, New York State private colleges are somewhat terrified about the impact of this. It's important to remember that while New York State has some famous colleges that attract national and international student bodies, New York, like most states, largely attracts, many of their private colleges attract local audiences, so local students. So this is a direct threat to them, and we'll see what happens as students put down their deposits. The impact could be even greater next year. This year, the final package happened at a point that most students were already well into the college application and planning process. Then on the right, I've got a photo of Mitch Daniels, who is the former governor of Indiana, is now the president of Purdue University. Last week, he announced that Purdue is buying Kaplan University, which is a national for-profit, largely online chain, and turning it into an online arm of Purdue so that Purdue can expand its online programs, and he hopes also better manage the existing Kaplan programs. This totally out of the blue. I was at a meeting with a bunch of college administrators last week when this happened. And Purdue had sent out a notice saying you might want to watch this live stream. We're going to announce some news. I get a lot of such notices. Rarely is there real news. I announced it in a speech I was giving to this group, and there were audible gasps in the crowd. People were like, wow, what's happening? And there's a lot of debate about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing for Purdue or Kaplan. But regardless, I think what both the New York State thing and the Purdue thing show is that we're in a period where people are looking for and trying new ideas. A few years ago, if I told you all of SUNY was going to be free, you probably would have laughed at me. If I had told you that Purdue was going to buy a major for-profit chain, you probably would have laughed at me. So what does this mean? I think if you look at most of what I've shared today, it's about the incredible challenges facing colleges and universities in attracting students, making the economic model work. I'm not saying that Cuomo's got it right or Mitch Daniels has got it right, but in this environment when many traditional patterns aren't working, people are looking for new ideas and being willing to try new ideas. That makes it a very exciting time to be writing about higher education, and I hope you find it a very exciting time to be in higher education, but no doubt it makes it a very challenging time for you. So I appreciate your interest in this overview, and now I am yours for questions.
Beautiful. Scott, thank you very much. That was fantastic, and it was really interesting to hear you end on some of the recent news. I have some questions that have come in. Just as a reminder, you can use the chat to send in a question or to let us know that you'd like to ask a question over audio. And feel free to go out to Twitter using the hashtag HelixWebinar at Helix Education to let us know of any other questions you might have. But I've got one for you, Scott, that's come in, and here it is. There's a number of issues that seem particularly acute for private undergraduate institutions from the survey and others. Why do you think these institutions are especially worried about enrolling undergrads and have decreasing confidence in their financial health?
So a few reasons. One is that this group includes many liberal arts colleges. Now, I happen to think that liberal arts colleges provide a great higher education, but by and large, liberal arts colleges haven't done well at making the case for why they provide a good higher education. I think many associate them with just the humanities, and while I think the humanities are great, the reality is there are a range of programs at liberal arts colleges. People here, right now, people are very worried about the ability of students to get jobs. Again, I think that there's a lot of ability of liberal arts college students, graduates, to get great jobs, and there's data to back that up. Yet somehow this message has not gotten out. In addition, these colleges are struggling with male applicants. Many of them are now quite a bit majority female, and many of these colleges have struggled with minority applicants at a time that our society is increasingly diverse. Then again, I'm not talking about the baccalaureate colleges like Williams and Swarthmore that have mega endowments. The typical one is, as I said earlier, totally tuition dependent, and they're discounting at, in many cases, dangerously high levels. You know, I ask presidents who visit here what their discount rates are. I've been doing this for a while, and before 2008, a lot of presidents would say, you know, I'm discounting in the 40%, and I know I need to bring it down to the low 40s or the high 30s. These days, I am stunned by the number of institutions discounting at 50%, even into the 60%. That is just not sustainable because many institutions are reaching a point where their tuition, their net tuition revenue doesn't go up when they increase tuition. So you combine this, and it's very difficult for many of these institutions.
Perfect. Thanks, Scott. One question's come in from the chat from Joanne. She asks if you could speak to private medical education and also healthcare education. Are there any trends you're seeing in those particular areas that are worth calling out here? Sure.
Healthcare is a great field to be in. Students graduating with healthcare degrees, and here I'm not just talking about doctors, I'm talking about nurses, I'm talking about physical therapists, I'm talking about nurses' assistants. Everything on the healthcare spectrum generally is a great area to get a job in. And so as a result, you have programs that are able to have very high placement records for their graduates. Now, where that comes into play is that means it is more palatable to many students to borrow some money, maybe not too much money, but to borrow to pay for college. When you look at the salaries and even signing bonuses, say for nurses, there is a very strong economic argument to say borrow, get in, and get out and get your job. Now, everything hinges on program quality because prospective students will look and say, you know, what percentage of your graduates are passing whatever licensure rate is involved. But because we have an aging society, healthcare needs are going up. And in addition, there is certainly a growing movement to have more healthcare delivered, not just by MDs, but by others. So osteopathic medicine is way up. Every form of nursing way up in terms of demand as well. So it's a great time to be in these fields because there's such demand for them. Here, I think it's really about competition for the most talented students. But students know that this is a high demand field.
Beautiful, thank you. We've had another question come in. Trina, who's from APUS, the American Public University System, asks if there's some projections that you've got in the survey or otherwise that are specific to institutions that are 100% online. Any thoughts there?
Sure. Well, we've actually got a story on the site, not from this survey, but from another study looking at online enrollments are going up. And now that is not unique to online-only institutions. In fact, one of the fastest growing areas for online enrollments is hybrid programs and hybrid courses. Increasingly, we're seeing that institutions that have a bricks and mortar campus are finding that their own students want some education online, and it's an important revenue stream for them to get other students enrolled online. I think part of this relates to student desires to learn that way. It's important to remember that digital natives, which would be today's generation of students, aren't the least bit intimidated by taking a course online. They're doing everything online. It also fits in with a trend of the current generation of students, both traditional age and older, of a sort of mix and match approach. Once upon a time, the idea was you found a college and you embraced everything about that college's curriculum and vision. Now, students may be very happy with a given college, but they're saying, you know what, for this course, I like this program over there. And so they want that ability to make the education fit their own model. And that also, I think, is very important as more and more students after the undergraduate level are saying, yes, I need more education and training, but they're not necessarily saying I need a specific degree. When I went to start inside higher ed, I had never taken business courses. And so I took a few online business courses. I didn't seek an MBA. I had specific skills in mind, and I wanted to be able to study asynchronously, as online obviously lets you do. I did that, and it was great. It taught me a bunch of things that I needed to learn. And so I think there is much more flexibility in what students are looking for, and online will continue to thrive as a result.
Fantastic. One follow-up to that, in the report, it mentions that a majority of presidents expressed concern about enrolling more students online. Given kind of those trends, do you think that trend continues in terms of concern about enrolling more? And if so, how can those concerns be mitigated for that population?
Sure. So a few things. One, I personally think, and from talking to just educators every day about these issues, I try not to focus too much on online versus in-person. I focus on quality. And I tend to worry when institutions have enrollment that goes up too fast, too quickly, whether it's in-person or online. Now, there's nothing wrong with enrollment growth. You all probably want that. But if you look at where institutions have gotten in trouble online, it has been very rapid growth without enough attention to quality and to mission. And so I always look and say, is this online growth that College A is looking at, is it consistent with who this college is, with what this college's values and areas of strength are? To me, that is the most important question. And it's not to say that colleges can't see steady year-over-year increases in enrollment, and particularly online, that gives you economies of scale that people really want to achieve. But it's about quality. And online makes it possible, I think, for those who might be cutting corners to grow perhaps too quickly to assure quality. But you don't have to do it that way. So I think presidents are right to be a little concerned, but being concerned doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything either.
Right on. We had a question come in from Julie. She's from Northeast Community College in Nebraska, and she asks, what do you think the greatest challenges are for those two-year associate degree institutions?
Sure. Community colleges are so important in the ecosystem of higher education. And one of their biggest challenges is financial. Many community colleges get the short end of the stick in state appropriations, local appropriations, even though they are doing amazing work, even though many times their students may not be as well prepared as one would like, so they require a lot of student services, academic advising, and so forth. Likewise, community colleges, because they serve this population, have to focus on student success in a way that involves including students who may need remedial education, finding ways to get them quickly through remedial and into for-credit higher education as soon as possible. And all of this while not necessarily getting the attention they deserve. But, you know, I have some hope that community colleges are going to start to get more attention, and that is because I am seeing more four-year institutions, and particularly private institutions, start to realize that community colleges can be a great source of transfer. In the current environment, there are an awful lot of students and families who just flat out will not consider 4 years at a private institution. Many of them would consider 2 years. And there are an awful lot of free community college programs propping up, sprouting up everywhere in the country. And so enlightened four-year privates and publics are working with community colleges to prepare their students for transfer. That's, to me, one of the most exciting trends that I see involving community colleges.
Fantastic. We talked a little bit about the international student impact on institutions, and I've got kind of a two-part question there that's come in. One, do you see any crossover in kind of that international population and the online student body at large?
Yes. In fact, if you look at one of the possible changes that we could see now is if students are worried about their ability to get a visa, well, you don't need a visa to enroll online. Now, it obviously affects, you have to be in a part of the world where you have good internet access, but these days that's close to everywhere. And so that is an opportunity for institutions with online programs that are in areas of high demand for international students to seek them out. If you look at, well, I personally think the MOOC thing of a few years ago was a lot of hype and never quite lived up to it. It was very striking that a large share of the students in those first MOOC courses were from all over the world. People were hungry for a taste of American higher education. So while I don't think it is the complete experience to living and being on a U.S. campus, it provides an awful lot. And I think particularly if the visas remain tough to get and students become more reluctant, I think we'll see a lot of, we may see growth in international online.
Got it. And then the follow-up to that, from an international student perspective, you mentioned that 5 to 10% that many private colleges are enrolling in full-pay international students. How do you see those recent events and maybe deposit day yesterday shaking out around international institutions in the enrollment for the coming academic year? And how do those institutions that were reliant on that kind of channel or area, how do they make up those gaps?
They are very nervous right now as they're counting up their deposits. We saw unprecedented activity of U.S. colleges, presidents, admissions officers traveling abroad during the last month to try to convince students, and particularly their parents, that it was a good idea to enroll in the United States. An important difference between international students and American students is that while parents obviously play a key role for U.S. students, they are more frequently the influencer, not the decision maker. For international students, they are the decision maker. So you saw presidents going to India to just basically tell parents that their kids would be okay. Again, I think we'll see a bigger change possibly next year. Students had already started their college search process, their visa application process, and so forth before Election Day, and many didn't expect the election to go the way it did. So that's not to say that we won't see an impact this year, but I think we may see even more of an impact next year with those students who are now doing their planning. And I fear for U.S. institutions that those who maybe a year ago wouldn't have spent a lot of time looking at Canadian universities are doing that right now.
Thanks. That Canada portion of that is fascinating. That'll be really interesting. I've got two more questions here. Certainly, if folks have any other questions that have come up, please reach out through the chat. We've got time for a couple more, or through the Q&A. Scott, this next one is just a really simple one, and that's, what do you think is contributing to the lack of confidence in the value of higher ed, as kind of mentioned through the survey?
So some of it is really unfair. I think if you look at every real study, it is the case that getting more higher education helps one economically. I'm not even dealing with the makes you a better person, helps you understand the world. There is simply no evidence against the proposition that better educated people have earned more and lead more fulfilling lives over time. There's an amazing amount of evidence to this. But during the Great Recession that started in 2008, you had less of an immediate bump than perhaps people experienced previously. And so people heard stories about, graduates moving back in with their parents and so forth. Not to say that those weren't true, but those who had a college degree were better off than those who didn't. Those who were laid off and had a college degree were better off than those who didn't. And yet there was this steady drumbeat of people, and I think politicians not always responsibly implying that there was no value. I think actually it's very important for colleges to fight back on this and to publicize their stats and the statistics that come out from every reliable social science group. Going to college still pays. It never stopped paying. But people hear all these reports, and unfortunately it adds up.
So that actually digs right into my follow-up question there. What can those institutions do to combat those misperceptions of the public, whether it's too expensive or it's too exclusive or it doesn't have enough value or I can't afford it? What can this segment really dig into that might help to sway that public opinion? What do you think?
So I think transparency about your own data and collecting good data is key. It's not enough to just have a careers section of your website where you have some pictures of happy graduates and good jobs. I think colleges need to do real surveys and to put out real data and say, this is how people are doing 1 year out, 5 years out, 10 years out. It's particularly important excuse me, for liberal arts colleges, for colleges with humanities majors. In many cases, they may not earn the most after year 1, but they're doing great by year 10. And whatever your story is, to actually tell it. So part of it is income. Part of it as well is debt. There's so much concern about debt. So providing good information that says, our typical graduates with X dollars in debt, they manage to pay it back in Y years. Concrete information, I think, is on the side of colleges, on the side of students making informed choices. But when people just see generic or not that much information, I think then these anecdotes take hold that make them question the value of higher education. And personally, I think that's a real shame.
Perfect. We've had a couple more come in. I've got one from Erin. Beautiful, beautiful. I've got one from Erin. She's from Liberty University, and she asks, to what extent does the declining number of high school graduates account for the decline in overall college enrollment?
Significantly, obviously, especially for institutions that serve traditional age undergraduates. A lot of this, though, is geography-based. There are parts of the country that are losing population, particularly young population, and there are parts of the country in the South and West especially where high schools are bulging and colleges don't have enough space. So a lot of this is that location, location, location is what matters. Now, we're seeing interesting strategies from colleges and parts of the country without increasing numbers of high school students who are being more creative at recruiting students from elsewhere. And again, there's a misperception here in that many people assume it's only, that it's only public institutions that primarily recruit from their region. The reality is most private colleges that aren't super famous primarily recruit from their state and neighboring states. So we're seeing more and more colleges as a result set up recruiting offices in places like California, which has a ton of students, and trying to change their enrollment patterns. But this is a big issue. It will just play out differently depending on where you're located.
Perfect. I've got one more, unless anybody out there through the chat wants to ask a question. We've got maybe time for one or two more, but I've got one more. This is my question from deep into the survey, and it kind of revolves around data. So many of the private college presidents don't like the college scorecard, right? Only 17%, I think I read, think it should be kept. What's your take on that? Is it more about what the scorecard represents and accountability, or is that kind of a judgment on the quality of data that's captured through the data source, which would be iPads in this case. What do you think?
Well, it's some of everything. Look, it is very easy to criticize a scorecard. You can show how the debt figures don't really work for community colleges, or the income figures don't work for certain kinds of institutions. There are people who object, and I understand this, to the very idea of judging institutions in part based on post-graduation income. And private colleges have been the most vocal in their objections. It's not my place to tell private colleges what they should or shouldn't object to, but I go back to my answer to an earlier question. Students and parents do want this kind of information. If you don't like the scorecard methodology, do your own. But I think the scorecard came out of a sense, in the Obama administration at least, that colleges weren't being forthcoming enough about information that might help students and families make informed choices. Now, my guess, and this is not based on inside information, my guess is the scorecard is not long for this world, primarily because the Trump administration generally doesn't seem too excited about keeping things going that were associated with the Obama administration. But the people asking questions about these issues, they're not going away. So I'm not sure it's such a terrible idea to have some comparable data out there. And I think if colleges don't want everyone to look at the scorecard, they should put out better information themselves.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. That's all the questions we have, and we're super close to time. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Scott for presenting today and for taking our questions. I'd like to encourage folks to go out to Inside Higher Ed. Certainly there's plenty of reading to do every day, multiple times a day. It's this time of year and in this climate and economy. So visit Inside Higher Ed, subscribe to their newsletter, and read up on the headlines every morning. Also would encourage you to come out to helixeducation.com. We have a copy of the survey available there. It's also available on IHE. We also have some printed copies of the survey we'd be happy to send your direction. And don't forget about the Enrollment Growth Playbook, available at helixeducation.com, our resource to really help institutions thrive and grow in this space. So with that, thanks again to Scott, thanks to all who attended, and have a fantastic Tuesday. Take care now.